March 23rd, 2021. That cold morning on the Chosen set when cameras were rolling, something happened to Jonathan Roumie that defied the laws of physics. Set Dr. Martinez confessed that in his 15 years of experience, he had never seen an injury like this. But what was truly mysterious were the last words Jonathan spoke to the camera just before the accident. "I think the time has come." Nobody knew what those words meant, until that night in the hospital room when Jonathan's confession shocked everyone who heard it. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about Jonathan Roumie and The Chosen. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Weatherford, Texas location where The Chosen's second season was being filmed. Jonathan had arrived at 5:30 a.m., as he always did, carrying his worn leather journal and a thermos of black coffee. The crew members who worked with him daily noticed something different about Jonathan that morning. A quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from him like heat from summer asphalt. Makeup artist Sarah Chen later told investigators that when she applied the prosthetic beard that transformed Jonathan into Jesus, his hands were trembling slightly, which was unusual for someone who had worn that same transformation hundreds of times before. She also noticed something she had never observed in 2 years of working with Jonathan: tiny beads of perspiration on his forehead, despite the cool March air. When she asked if he was feeling well, Jonathan simply stared at her for a long moment before answering, "Today feels different, Sarah, like everything is about to change." The pre-production meeting that morning had been routine, with director Dallas Jenkins reviewing the day's shooting schedule over coffee and donuts in the makeshift production office. They were planning to film what should have been a straightforward scene: Jesus walking through a marketplace, interacting with vendors and children, blessing a few families. It was the kind of scene they had shot dozens of times throughout the first season, requiring no special effects, no dangerous stunts, just Jonathan moving through a meticulously reconstructed first-century Palestinian market that production designer Dan Bishop had spent weeks perfecting. The safety coordinator had cleared the set 3 times. The stunt coordinator wasn't even present because no stunts were planned, and the insurance representative had signed off on what appeared to be one of the safest shooting days in the entire production schedule. Yet what happened next would haunt everyone present for years to come, transforming their understanding of what was possible when faith intersected with filmmaking. The morning that changed everything. At exactly 2:17 p.m., according to the digital timestamp on camera 4, Jonathan was walking past a wooden merchant stall when he suddenly stopped mid-stride. The cameras kept rolling because the scene wasn't finished. But Jonathan had frozen in place, his eyes fixed on something beyond the frame that nobody else could see. Camera operator Mike Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran of film productions, later described the moment as unlike anything I'd ever witnessed through a lens. He instinctively zoomed in on Jonathan's face, and what he captured would later be analyzed frame by investigators, trying to understand what happened next. The footage revealed something that even professional film analysts struggled to explain. Jonathan's pupils dilated completely for exactly 3 seconds, then contracted to pinpoints, then returned to normal, all while his breathing remained perfectly steady and his facial expression shifted from confusion to what witnesses described as profound recognition. Jonathan's lips moved, forming words that the boom operator's equipment barely picked up over the ambient noise of the recreated marketplace. "I think the time has come." His voice carried a weight that made several crew members stop what they were doing and turn toward him, sensing something significant was about to happen. Script supervisor Amanda Walsh, who had been following along with the day's dialogue, immediately noticed that these words weren't in the script, weren't part of any scene they had planned, and weren't even close to the Hebrew phrases Jonathan typically used when he improvised as Jesus. Then, without any warning, without tripping over anything, without any visible cause, without even changing his facial expression, Jonathan Roumie collapsed straight down, as if his legs had simply stopped supporting him. But here's where the story becomes impossible to explain, using conventional logic, where physics and eyewitness testimony collide in ways that challenge everything we understand about space and movement. When the crew rushed to help him, Jonathan wasn't where he had fallen. The wooden merchant's stall where Jonathan had been standing, surrounded by baskets of prop fruit and bolts of period-appropriate fabric, was 30 meters from where the crew found his unconscious body, lying peacefully on a patch of grass that hadn't even been part of the scene they were filming. 30 meters. Not 30 centimeters, not 3 meters, but 30 full meters across, completely flat ground, with no inclines, no hidden machinery, no trapdoors, no special effects equipment that could have moved him. Security footage from 3 different angles confirmed what seemed impossible. Jonathan had simply vanished from one location and appeared in another, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound that medical experts would later describe as inconsistent with any known type of fall injury. The footage, which was later examined by digital forensics experts brought in by the production company's insurance carrier, showed no evidence of tampering, no missing frames, no technical glitches that could explain the apparent teleportation of a full-grown man across a film set in broad daylight with dozens of witnesses present. The medical mystery deepens. Dr. Elena Martinez, the on-set medical professional who had been hired after a minor injury during first-season filming, examined Jonathan immediately after the crew found him. What she discovered would challenge everything she had learned in 15 years of emergency medicine. The injury pattern was unlike anything in her textbooks or her experience. A perfectly circular wound on Jonathan's forehead, approximately 2 inches in diameter, that appeared to have been caused by an impact with something smooth and round, yet there were no objects matching that description anywhere on the set. The wound was clean, with edges so precise they looked almost surgical, and it was bleeding in a pattern that Dr. Martinez described as geometrically impossible. The blood flow formed perfect concentric circles around the wound, as if following some invisible template. Even stranger, Jonathan's vital signs showed something that should have been medically impossible. His heart rate was perfectly calm, at 62 beats per minute, almost meditative in its steadiness, despite having just suffered what appeared to be a traumatic head injury. His blood pressure was ideal, his breathing was deep and regular, and his brain activity, as measured by a portable EEG unit Dr. Martinez had brought to monitor potential concussion symptoms, showed the kind of alpha wave patterns typically associated with deep prayer or advanced meditation practices. These readings were so unusual that Dr. Martinez initially suspected equipment malfunction, but testing revealed all devices were functioning perfectly. When emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes of the initial call, paramedic Patricia Valdez, a 15-year veteran of emergency services, noted something in her report that she later described as the strangest observation of my entire career. As they loaded Jonathan into the ambulance, the unconscious actor began speaking in what Valdez documented as an unknown language characterized by flowing melodic syllables that seemed to follow ancient linguistic patterns. Valdez, a practicing Catholic who had studied Latin in seminary school before choosing emergency medicine, later confessed that hearing Jonathan speak those unknown words brought tears to her eyes, though she couldn't explain why. She described feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and recognition, as if I was hearing something my soul knew, even though my mind had never encountered it. The ambulance ride to Weatherford Regional Medical Center took 14 minutes, during which Jonathan continued speaking intermittently in the mysterious language. EMT Marcus Johnson, who was monitoring Jonathan's vital signs during transport, reported that each time Jonathan spoke, all of the electronic monitoring equipment experienced brief fluctuations. Heart monitors, blood pressure cuffs, oxygen saturation devices, even the ambulance's radio and GPS system would flicker momentarily before returning to normal function. Johnson, who had never experienced anything similar in 12 years of emergency transport, documented these incidents meticulously, creating a record that would later become crucial evidence in the insurance investigation. Hospital revelations. At Weatherford Regional Medical Center, Dr. Rebecca Torres, the attending emergency physician, performed the initial examination and discovered something that would fundamentally change her understanding of human physiology and consciousness. Jonathan's brain scans, including both CT and MRI imaging, showed completely normal brain structure and function, with no signs of concussion, hematoma, or any type of trauma that could explain his unconscious state. His blood work revealed elevated levels of specific neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and several endorphins typically associated with profound spiritual experiences or deep meditative states. Torres later confided to colleagues that she had only seen similar neurochemical patterns in research studies of Tibetan monks during advanced spiritual practices that required years of training to achieve. The medical mystery deepened when Jonathan's unconscious state continued far longer than any physiological explanation could account for. With no signs of brain trauma, no toxic substances in his bloodstream, no indication of seizure activity or metabolic disorder, Jonathan should have regained consciousness within minutes of arrival. Instead, he remained peacefully unconscious for over 4 hours, his brain activity showing the same meditative patterns throughout the entire period. Torres consulted with neurologists at Dallas Methodist Hospital via video conference, sharing the brain scans and blood work results, but none of the specialists could provide a medical explanation for Jonathan's condition. Here's what nobody expected. When Jonathan finally regained consciousness at 9:45 p.m., the first thing he asked wasn't about his condition, his location, or what had happened to him. Instead, he looked directly at Dr. Torres with eyes that she later described as completely lucid and strangely knowing, and said, "Did someone write down what I said while I was unconscious? It's important that someone wrote down exactly what I said." The medical staff exchanged confused glances, because according to all hospital records and witness testimony, Jonathan had been completely silent since arriving at the medical center. The only person who had heard him speak was EMT Patricia Valdez in the ambulance, and those words had been in that mysterious, unidentifiable language. Dr. Torres gently explained that Jonathan had been silent during his time at the hospital, but he became visibly distressed by this information, insisting repeatedly that he had been given important information that needed to be recorded and preserved. He described vivid memories of speaking extensively while unconscious, sharing details about conversations he claimed to have had with beings of light, who had shown him scenes from both the past and future that were crucial to his understanding of the role he was playing in The Chosen. The director's shock. When Dallas Jenkins arrived at the hospital that evening, having rushed from the set as soon as he heard about the accident, he expected to find Jonathan groggy and disoriented from what appeared to be a serious head injury. Instead, he found an actor who seemed more alert and focused than he had ever seen him. Jonathan immediately grabbed Jenkins's hand and whispered something that Jenkins would later describe as the most profound and personally meaningful thing anyone has ever said to me. According to sources close to the production who were present in the hospital room that night, Jonathan told Jenkins that during his unconsciousness he had experienced what he called a preview of completion, a vision so vivid and detailed that it revealed not just how The Chosen series would conclude, but the specific impact it would have on millions of viewers around the world. Jenkins, who had created The Chosen based on his own spiritual journey and deep study of the Gospels, was stunned by the theological sophistication and historical accuracy of what Jonathan shared with him that night. Jonathan described scenes from Jesus' life that weren't recorded in Scripture, but that aligned perfectly with historical and archaeological evidence about first-century Palestine. He shared insights about the political and social context of Jesus' ministry that impressed even the series' team of academic consultants, details about daily life, religious customs, and cultural practices that would have required years of intensive study to master. But perhaps most remarkably, Jonathan described specific future scenes for The Chosen that perfectly addressed story and character development, challenges the writing team had been struggling with for months. He outlined emotional arcs for supporting characters that would bring new depth to their portrayals, suggested historical connections that would enrich the show's authenticity, and provided solutions to theological questions that had been causing debates among the series' religious advisors. Jenkins later told close friends that Jonathan's vision seemed to provide a complete roadmap for the series' remaining seasons, as if he had been given access to the ultimate source material for the story they were trying to tell. The miraculous recovery. The hospital released Jonathan the next morning with what Dr. Torres documented as a clean bill of health despite unexplained circumstances. But what happened to his head wound overnight defied medical explanation. The perfectly circular injury that had been clearly visible when Jonathan arrived at the hospital, requiring several stitches and causing significant bleeding, had healed to nothing more than a faint pink mark by morning. Torres, who had been practicing emergency medicine for over 20 years, documented this accelerated healing as highly unusual but not medically impossible, though privately she told colleagues it was the fastest healing she had ever witnessed in 2 decades of treating trauma patients. The healing process continued even after Jonathan left the hospital. By the time he returned to set 3 days later, even the faint pink mark had disappeared completely, leaving no trace that he had ever been injured. The medical staff who had treated him requested follow-up appointments to study this unusual healing rate, but Jonathan politely declined, saying that he preferred to focus on completing the work he had been called to finish. What happened when Jonathan returned to the chosen set reveals the true extent of his transformation. Everyone noticed he was different, not just physically healed, but fundamentally changed in ways that affected every aspect of his performance and his interactions with cast and crew. Veteran crew members who had worked with hundreds of actors throughout their careers described a new depth in Jonathan's portrayal of Jesus, as if the accident had unlocked something that had been waiting beneath the surface all along. Camera operators reported that Jonathan now seemed to anticipate lighting changes before they happened, moving into perfect position without direction from the cinematography team. Sound technicians noticed that his voice carried differently, with new resonance and depth that required adjustments to equipment that had been calibrated specifically for his previous performances. Most remarkably, Jonathan began delivering lines with such authenticity that other actors found themselves responding emotionally even during rehearsals, as if they were interacting not with an actor playing a role, but with the historical figure himself. Unexplained awareness. Most significantly, Jonathan began displaying what the crew quietly called uncanny awareness, an ability to know things about people and situations that he couldn't have learned through normal means. He would comfort extras who were dealing with personal problems he couldn't have known about, offering specific advice that addressed their exact circumstances. He would suggest script changes that perfectly resolved character development issues the writers hadn't yet shared with the cast. During filming of emotionally challenging scenes, he would instinctively know which crew members were struggling with the content and would quietly offer support that was precisely what each person needed to hear. The most documented example of this new awareness occurred during the filming of the Sermon on the Mount sequence. Jonathan suggested adding a moment where Jesus notices a specific woman in the crowd who is grieving the loss of her child. The suggestion seemed to come from nowhere, as no such character had been written into the script, but Jenkins decided to include it, casting local extra Maria Gonzalez in the role. When they filmed the scene, Jonathan's portrayal of Jesus, acknowledging the grieving mother, was so moving that Gonzalez began crying uncontrollably. Later, she revealed that she had recently lost her own child and had come to the set hoping to find some measure of comfort in watching the filming. Jonathan's addition to the scene addressed her grief so directly that she felt it was a personal message of healing. This pattern repeated throughout the remaining filming of Season 2. Jonathan would suggest small changes or additions that seemed to anticipate the exact emotional needs of cast and crew members. He would recommend specific takes that captured precisely the spiritual truth each scene was meant to convey. During the filming of the resurrection sequence, several crew members reported feeling an overwhelming sense of peace that lingered for hours after cameras stopped rolling, a feeling they described as being in the presence of something holy. The insurance investigation. When investigators from the production company's insurance carrier arrived to document the accident for their official report, they expected to conduct a routine inquiry into what appeared to be a straightforward workplace injury. Instead, they found themselves investigating what their lead investigator would privately describe as the most inexplicable incident in 30 years of professional investigations. Thomas Chen, a former FBI agent who had spent decades solving complex cases involving insurance fraud, workplace accidents, and even cases with suspected supernatural elements, interviewed every witness, examined every piece of equipment, analyzed every frame of security footage, and consulted with physicists and medical experts in an attempt to find a rational explanation for what had happened to Jonathan Roumie on March 23, 2021. Chen's investigation revealed a series of anomalies that defied conventional explanation. The security footage, examined by digital forensics experts using the most advanced analysis techniques available, showed no evidence of tampering, no missing frames, no technical glitches, and no possible explanation for how Jonathan could have moved 30 meters across the set. Multiple witnesses confirmed the same impossible sequence of events, ruling out mass hallucination or coordinated deception. The medical evidence, reviewed by independent specialists, confirmed both the severity of Jonathan's initial injury and the impossibility of his rapid recovery. Perhaps most puzzling were the electromagnetic anomalies Chen's team discovered while reviewing the technical data from the day of the accident. Electronic equipment throughout the set had experienced brief malfunctions during the exact time period when Jonathan disappeared and reappeared. Cameras had recorded unexplained light fluctuations, sound equipment had picked up audio frequencies that shouldn't have been present, and even the craft services truck's refrigeration unit had briefly stopped working, restarting itself exactly when Jonathan regained consciousness hours later at the hospital. Chen interviewed Jonathan extensively, using techniques he had developed during his FBI career to detect deception or false memories. He found Jonathan to be completely credible, with no signs of fabrication or psychological instability. Jonathan's account of his experience was consistent across multiple interviews, detailed enough to be verified against medical records and witness testimony, and delivered with a sincerity that convinced even Chen's most skeptical colleagues. The official conclusion. After 3 months of investigation, Chen reached a conclusion that he was reluctant to include in his official findings, but felt compelled to document for the sake of professional integrity. In 30 years of investigations involving seemingly impossible events, Chen had always found rational explanations. Equipment failures, human error, deliberate deception, or simply misunderstood natural phenomena. Jonathan's case was different. The evidence clearly pointed to what Chen carefully termed external intervention of an unknown nature, a phrase he used to avoid more controversial language while acknowledging that conventional explanations were inadequate. Chen's official report simply stated, "cause undetermined," but his private notes, which were later obtained through a Freedom of Information request filed by a documentary filmmaker, contained detailed observations that revealed the true scope of his bewilderment. He wrote, "Subject appears to have experienced a controlled supernatural event characterized by instantaneous relocation, accelerated healing, and enhanced cognitive abilities. Standard investigative protocols are insufficient to explain the observed phenomena. Recommend classification as anomalous pending development of expanded investigative frameworks." The insurance company ultimately paid all medical expenses and provided compensation for lost filming time without dispute, recognizing that their investigation had failed to identify any negligence or preventable cause for the accident. However, they also quietly implemented new protocols for productions involving religious themes, requiring additional on-set medical personnel and more comprehensive monitoring equipment. Changes that industry insiders understood were directly related to the unexplained events surrounding Jonathan's accident. Transformative impact. Meanwhile, Jonathan himself began sharing carefully selected details about his experience during those 4 hours of unconsciousness, though he remained selective about when and to whom he spoke about the more extraordinary aspects of his vision. According to multiple sources within the chosen production, Jonathan described visiting what he called the place between moments where time moved differently, and where he was shown scenes from the life of Jesus that had never been recorded in Scripture. These visions, he claimed, were so detailed that they included complete sensory information: the smell of bread baking in first-century ovens, the texture of homespun fabric, the sound of Aramaic spoken by native speakers, the weight of the cross, the exact temperature of the air during the crucifixion. The impact on the Chosen's production was immediate and profound. Scenes that had been planned for weeks were rewritten based on insights Jonathan gained during his mysterious experience. Historical consultants were amazed by the accuracy of details Jonathan suggested, details that could only have come from extensive research into first-century Palestinian culture, research that the actor insisted he had never conducted. Rabbi David Stern, who served as the series' primary consultant on Jewish customs and traditions, later wrote that Jonathan's post-accident performance contained Hebraic nuances and theological sophistication that would require years of intensive Talmudic study to master. Dr. Sarah Williams, a professor of biblical archaeology at Dallas Theological Seminary, who had advised the production on historical accuracy, found herself regularly consulting with Jonathan about details of first-century life that he seemed to know intuitively. Jonathan's suggestions about everything from the design of fishing nets to the specific prayers that would have been said before meals were consistently accurate, according to the latest archaeological and historical research, yet he claimed this knowledge had come to him during his vision, rather than through study. Pilgrimage to the set. But the accident's effects extended far beyond the production itself. Word spread quietly through Christian entertainment circles, religious communities, and spiritual networks about what had happened to Jonathan, and visitors began arriving at the Chosen set requesting to meet him. These weren't typical fans seeking autographs or selfies. They were people claiming to have had their own supernatural experiences, drawn by reports of Jonathan's transformation, and hoping to find validation or understanding of their own spiritual encounters. The production company eventually had to hire additional security to manage what one executive described as pilgrimage-like visitations. People traveled from across the country and even internationally to visit the set, many bringing sick family members in hope that proximity to Jonathan might bring healing. While Jonathan was uncomfortable with this attention and consistently redirected conversations away from himself and toward the message of the Chosen, the production team couldn't ignore the impact his presence was having on visitors. Dr. Martinez documented several cases of what appeared to be spontaneous healing among set visitors, though she was careful to note that she couldn't establish definitive causal relationships. Maria Santos, a catering assistant who had been struggling with chronic pain for over a decade, reported complete relief after a brief conversation with Jonathan during lunch break. Her medical records, which were later independently verified by her personal physician, showed no trace of the fibromyalgia condition that had caused her debilitating pain for years. Similar reports emerged from other crew members and visitors. James Peterson, a lighting technician, experienced the disappearance of a skin condition that had persisted for 5 years. Rebecca Morrison, whose daughter had been born with a severe heart defect, brought the child to set, hoping to meet Jonathan. After a brief encounter where Jonathan simply placed his hand on the child's head and offered a quiet blessing, subsequent medical examinations revealed significant improvement in the child's cardiac function that her doctors described as highly unusual but medically documented. Medical investigation expands. Dr. Rebecca Torres, the emergency room physician who had treated Jonathan after his accident, became fascinated by the medical implications of his case and the reports of healing associated with his presence. She began conducting informal interviews with others who claimed to have been healed through contact with Jonathan, and her findings were so compelling that she eventually collaborated with colleagues at several universities to conduct more formal research into what they termed anomalous healing events associated with dramatic performance. The resulting study, published in the Journal of Unexplained Medical Phenomena, carefully avoided mentioning Jonathan by name but documented dozens of cases of medically verified healing that occurred in connection with a specific actor's portrayal of Jesus. The paper noted patterns in the types of healing reported, the consistency of witness testimony, and the medical documentation supporting the claims. While the authors stopped short of drawing definitive conclusions about causation, they acknowledged that the evidence warranted further investigation into the relationship between spiritual performance and physiological healing. The study attracted attention from researchers at major medical institutions, leading to informal collaborations with neuroscientists, psychologists, and even physicists interested in understanding the mechanisms that might explain such phenomena. Torres found herself consulting with experts in fields ranging from quantum biology to consciousness studies, all attempting to understand how Jonathan's experience might fit within expanding scientific frameworks for understanding mind-body interactions. Religious leader visits. As word of Jonathan's transformation and its effects spread beyond the immediate production circle, religious leaders from various denominations began requesting meetings with the actor. Cardinal Martinez from the Diocese of Dallas visited the set personally and spent 2 hours in private conversation with Jonathan. The cardinal's carefully worded public statement afterward was diplomatically phrased but spiritually significant. "I have encountered a depth of spiritual understanding and authenticity that is both remarkable and inspiring. This young man's portrayal carries a truth that speaks to the heart of Christian faith." Similar visits followed from prominent figures in Protestant denominations, Orthodox traditions, Jewish rabbis, and even Buddhist monks and Islamic scholars who had somehow heard about the actor's experience and were curious about its implications for interfaith understanding of spiritual transformation. Pastor Rick Warren, author of The Purpose-Driven Life, spent an entire day on set and later described Jonathan's portrayal as the most authentic representation of Jesus I have witnessed in any medium. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, before his passing, met with Jonathan and later wrote that their conversation had renewed his appreciation for the shared spiritual heritage of Judaism and Christianity. He noted that Jonathan's understanding of first-century Jewish culture and religious practice was so sophisticated that it revealed new insights into the historical context of Jesus' ministry that could benefit Jewish scholarship. These meetings weren't publicity events or formal endorsements, but rather quiet consultations between spiritual leaders seeking to understand what they recognized as a genuine phenomenon. Many of these religious figures had extensive experience with claims of supernatural events and were naturally skeptical, yet they found something in Jonathan's presence and understanding that convinced them of the authenticity of his experience. Performance transformation. The most profound change in Jonathan himself became evident during the filming of The Chosen's crucifixion scenes, which were scheduled several months after his accident. Cast and crew members who had worked on emotionally challenging productions throughout their careers reported that Jonathan's portrayal contained a level of authenticity that was almost unbearable to witness. Cinematographer Akis Konstantakopoulos, who had filmed countless dramatic scenes throughout his distinguished career, later confided that he found himself weeping behind the camera, overcome by what he described as the weight of absolute truth in Jonathan's performance. The crucifixion scenes required multiple takes over several days, a process that would typically become routine as actors and crew adjusted to the technical demands of the shots. Instead, each take seemed to carry the same emotional impact as the first, with crew members reporting that they never became desensitized to the power of Jonathan's portrayal. Several experienced actors playing Roman soldiers broke character during filming, unable to continue their roles as tormentors when faced with the reality of Jonathan's performance. Mary Magdalene actress Elizabeth Tabish, who had developed a strong professional relationship with Jonathan during the first season, noticed that working with him after his accident required new levels of preparation and emotional resilience. She described feeling that she was no longer acting opposite another performer, but rather responding to someone who seemed to carry the actual weight of the character's experience. Their scenes together, particularly those depicting Jesus' final interactions with his followers, carried an emotional authenticity that surprised even the actors themselves. Global impact and recognition. The impact on The Chosen's subsequent seasons was undeniable, with episodes filmed after Jonathan's accident receiving unprecedented critical acclaim from religious scholars, film critics, and audiences worldwide. The series began receiving recognition from institutions that had previously shown little interest in faith-based entertainment. The Vatican's Pontifical Council for Culture issued a rare statement praising the series for its extraordinary spiritual authenticity and theological sophistication, a recognition that industry experts attributed directly to the transformation they witnessed in Jonathan's performance after his accident. Universities began incorporating episodes of The Chosen into their theology, history, and even film studies curricula, with professors noting a level of historical and spiritual accuracy that elevated the series beyond typical entertainment into the realm of educational and spiritual resource. The series received invitations to screen at film festivals that typically focused on art house and independent cinema, recognition that surprised even the production team. International distribution of The Chosen expanded dramatically as word of the series' unique authenticity spread through religious communities worldwide. The series was translated into dozens of languages, with distributors noting that audiences seemed particularly drawn to seasons filmed after Jonathan's accident, even when they couldn't articulate exactly why those episodes felt different from typical religious programming. Ongoing mystery. Today, more than 3 years after that mysterious accident on the Texas set, Jonathan Roumie continues to portray Jesus in The Chosen with a depth and authenticity that defies conventional explanation. The insurance files remain classified, pending ongoing review. The medical records are sealed as part of continuing research into anomalous healing phenomena, and Jonathan himself speaks sparingly about the details of his experience, claiming that some aspects of his vision were meant for the performance, not for public discussion. Industry professionals who have worked with Jonathan since his accident consistently report the same observation, that his portrayal transcends typical acting technique, creating moments of genuine spiritual encounter for everyone present during filming. Directors describe having to adjust their approach to scenes involving Jonathan, recognizing that his performance carries an authenticity that requires different technical and emotional preparation from other actors. The medical community continues to study Jonathan's case as part of broader research into consciousness, healing, and the relationship between spiritual experience and physiological changes. Torres maintains contact with Jonathan for ongoing research, documenting the long-term effects of his transformation and its continued impact on those around him. Her findings have contributed to a growing body of research, suggesting that consciousness and spiritual experience may influence physical reality in ways that science is only beginning to understand. The enduring questions. But for those who witnessed the accident and its aftermath, one fact remains undisputable. Something extraordinary happened to Jonathan Roumie on March 23, 2021, something that transformed not just his performance, but his very understanding of the character he was born to portray. Whether that transformation came through divine intervention, unexplained natural phenomena, or some other force beyond current scientific understanding, the evidence speaks for itself in every scene Jonathan has filmed since that day. The man who fell 30 meters without moving, who healed impossibly fast, who gained knowledge he never studied, and who now carries himself with an authenticity that transcends acting, remains the same humble actor from New York who simply wanted to tell the greatest story ever told. But everyone who works with him knows they're witnessing something unprecedented in the history of dramatic performance. A portrayal of Jesus that seems to transcend the boundaries between performance and reality, creating moments of genuine spiritual encounter for everyone present. The investigation files may be sealed, the medical explanations may be incomplete, and the theological implications may be debated for years to come. But the transformation itself is undeniable. Jonathan Roumie's accident on The Chosen set marked not just a moment of personal change, but a shift in the very nature of how sacred stories can be told through the medium of film and television. And perhaps that was always the point of Jonathan Roumie's mysterious accident, the purpose hidden within those inexplicable 30 meters that physics cannot explain, the healing that medicine cannot rationalize, and the transformation that continues to impact everyone who witnesses it. Sometimes the most profound truths come not through explanation, but through experience. And sometimes the greatest miracles happen when cameras are rolling, preserving forever the moments when the impossible becomes undeniably real, when an actor's portrayal becomes something more than performance, something that touches the deepest truths of human existence and divine possibility.